Welcome back, everyone. Let's jump into the Cuban Missile Crisis. Day 7. We've had a week to digest this. What will happen next?
The weekend when the Cuban Missile Crisis moves into an actual phase of war, the #1 album in the United States of America is Peter, Paul, and Mary's debut album featuring the song If I Had a Hammer. Now, it's about the hammer of justice, the bell of freedom, and a song about love between the brothers and the sisters all over this land. President John F. Kennedy has a big hammer, and he believes that it is the hammer of justice. He also has a bell of freedom that today he will ring loud and clear. And he will sing a song, but it's not a song about love between brothers and sisters.
Okay. One weekend.
This is TimeGhost, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm Indy Nidell. Over the past weekend, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev has gone from believing that the Soviets have deterred the Americans from invading Cuba to realizing that, in fact, they've done the exact opposite. President Kennedy has moved from leaning towards doing nothing at all about Soviet missiles on Cuba to initiating an act of war against Cuba and the USSR.
And the act of war is just a blockade. That's as far as it's actually initiated. That starts today. There's nothing else that's been initiated.
So on this Monday morning, October 22nd, 1962, the White House is buzzing with activity. In fact, the entire American administration and defense apparatus are working at high speed and with great intensity. The military preparations have been extended beyond the Atlantic and the East Coast. Troops and supplies are being moved towards the Caribbean from all over the world. And by now, it is not only the Soviets that have noticed. This morning, the Washington Post runs a headline on the front page speculating that there is an international crisis pending. Based on observation,
So that's going to create panic. That's going to create economic changes. That's going to create hysteria. That's going to create questioning, so forth.
of these activities, it is high time for the government to act. The public announcement is going to be made at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Before that, Kennedy will talk to the congressional leadership and key allies.
What a time that was. You talked to the congressional leadership before a major military decision.
To prepare for all of that, he will convene cabinet members and meet with military and civilian advisors throughout the day. First, the White House press secretary contacts all major
Is that Slamay?
U.S. news outlets and asks them to hold back on any reports until the end of the day. But there is also concern that the Soviets will make an announcement themselves, preempting the Americans. For a minute, the White House considers issuing an immediate written statement, but finally they decide to stick to the plan. One of the first things to do is to prepare the speech to be delivered to the United Nations by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Adlai Stevenson.
And he really doesn't want any part of this. He's just like, I'm here, fine. Because of course he is the white dove of the group. He wants diplomacy over war. However, they chose an action of blockade, which is better than invasion, so.
There is great concern that Stevenson will not be up to the job of sticking it hard to the USSR. Remember, he was the only one to openly voice strong opposition to the chosen path of action. So Kennedy is taking steps to make sure that Stevenson is up for the job. At 6:30 in the morning, he calls an advisor in Frankfurt, Germany. It's John J. McCloy, chairman of the private think tank, the Council on Foreign Relations. These two men will actually stay connected beyond Kennedy's death, as McCloy will serve as chairman of the Warren Commission that will investigate Kennedy's assassination a little more than a year from now.
You say this is a difficulty at the UN?
No, but it's going to provide difficulty at the UN. And
you want me to come back to just be of general help?
well, I think we need somebody up there to sort of sustain Adlai and stiffen him and support him. And
McCloy.
Do they not trust Adlai to relay it? Or are they just trying to back him up?
Cancels everything and will take the first flight tomorrow. JFK continues.
no, I'll check with my military. I'll get my air aid on the thing, and then we will be back.
I'll just wait to hear a further call from you.
Yeah.
Some representative.
I'll be back in the next few minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
But it's not only Stevenson who has concerns. During a meeting of the National Security Council in the morning, Secretary of State Rusk makes a last-ditch attempt to persuade Kennedy to call off the blockade and offer up the U.S. missiles in Turkey and Italy as a trade for the Soviet missiles on Cuba. The president reportedly flat-out rejects the proposal.
Oof. Yeah, that was like, I mean, that's gonna be what it takes, though.
And berates Rusk for restarting that discussion. Kennedy also calls his predecessor, President Eisenhower, and leaves no doubt as to the true intentions of the United States regarding an invasion of Cuba.
We have to assume that as this surveillance continues with the U-2s, that these SAM sites may shoot one down. At that point, then we were just discussing what action we will take and in attacking the SAM site. So I would assume that this will only be the first of an increasing number of steps. We're not going to be in any position to carry out an invasion for some days because we have to move those troops around from San Diego, but we're going to do all those things, and we'll just stay in touch with you this week, which, as I say, we anticipate that it will be getting more intense.
Eisenhower supports him.
Well, I thank you for telling me, and I will, personally, I think you're really making the only move you can.
Yeah, it's tough to, as I say, we will, I don't know, we may get into the invasion business before many days are out,
yeah.
but
Of course, from the military standpoint, that's a clean-cut thing to do now.
That's right.
Because
that's right.
you've made up your mind, you've got to get rid of this thing.
Right.
Kennedy
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a daunting. There's two sides of the equation. There's the equation of outright, like, we got to get rid of this thing, as they're talking about, because they're seeing it from a point of view of what nuclear capabilities can be. We went through the 50s already. The 50s was such a scary time of nuclear standoff, not in this regard, but nuclear standoff in terms of the space race towards the end of the 50s, early 60s. But then you see all this testing start to happen across Pacific or Siberia and towards the United States, and we know what the magnitude of these bombs can do. These big bombs can do. So you put that in your back pocket, and then you see that part of the equation is now 90 miles off of your coast. You start to create these hypotheticals. What if this goes to Dallas? What if this goes to DC? What if this goes to Chicago? Do we shoot it down? Can we shoot it down? What happens then? My legacy's gone. Millions might lose their lives. The Democratic Republic of America might be gone as we know it. The Soviets might win. And there's also the propaganda side as well, where you try to keep strength, right? You try to keep some strength with at home domestically, within not telling too much, but also saying we're behind, but also saying we have strength. The weird balance tug of war there. And then it's also your propaganda to the Soviets, which is, strength, but also it's a weird little position to be in. It's probably one of the weirdest times in the history of the world, because you are trying to play both sides of the equation at all times.
He is worried about one thing, though.
General, what about if the Soviet Union, Khrushchev announces tomorrow, which I think he will, that if we attack Cuba, that it's going to...
It's weird how he references him. I guess maybe not. He calls him general. Most presidents are still called president after their, most presidents are still called today president after they've been president. But that's interesting.
Be nuclear war. And what's your judgment as to the chances they'll fire these things off if we invade Cuba?
I don't believe it bit.
You don't think they will? In other words, you would take that risk if the situation seemed desirable.
As a matter of fact, though, what can you do?
Well,
I wonder why he says that. without 100%. Well, first off, he doesn't have all the context probably, unless he's been briefed. But that's a huge assumption right there.
Eisenhower is correct as to the mindset of the Soviets. They have now concluded their discussions regarding how much freedom they will give their commanders in the field to use their tactical nukes.
Oh, okay.
An order now goes out to not use any nuclear weapons without prior consent from Moscow.
Yeah, because they don't want to get in that pickle.
There's only two issues with that. First of all, to launch the MRBMs and IRBMs, Moscow has to provide the launch codes anyhow, but there is no way of stopping the use of the tactical nuclear arms remotely. Second of all, the commanders have already been given the order that if they should lose contact with the state, they can deploy tactical nukes as they see fit. As we will see in days, this is not a hypothetical situation, but a real direct threat. Meanwhile, the U.S. Armed Forces are taken to the third highest defense readiness, DEFCON 3, increase in force readiness above that required for normal readiness. In practice, this means that the Air Force is now ready to mobilize within 15 minutes, and that all other service branches are ready to act. Hey, you know what? The mother of a school friend of mine contacted me on Facebook when we started this series. Well, she was also my 5th grade English teacher, actually. Anyhow, she told me that at this time, she and her U.S. Army husband were stationed in Wiesbaden, Germany, and she was in hospital about to give birth to her first child in a matter of days. She then got a message that in case of a nuclear exchange, she should make her way to Spain to be repatriated. Nobody told her, though, how she should go about doing this.
That's the government for you. Telling you to do something, but not telling you how to get there. Happens so often.
Anyhow, it might seem odd.
Interesting.
President Kennedy has moved from considering doing nothing at all only 3 days ago to heading to war with determination today. But if you think about it, it's not really. The president is commander-in-chief of the armed forces. While Kennedy has personal doubts and fears that he might be starting World War III, once he has committed himself to a course of action, he really has no choice but to follow through. For others in the administration, it's different, like Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Now, RFK will later claim that he was the first one to oppose the Hawks and that his line was always diplomacy. With the declassified records, we know now that this is not correct.
Ooh.
On the first day of the crisis, he was a strong advocate for an immediate invasion. But 6 days later, he's changed his mind.
Well, people can change their mind, but make the record straight.
We also know that it was Undersecretary of State George Ball that convinced RFK to reconsider during several discussions between the 17th and 19th of October. To what extent the Kennedy brothers discussed and planned this as a coordinated good cop, bad cop effort, we will never know, as they will both fall victims to assassins' bullets before they can reveal the full story. In order to understand what is about to happen, we have to consider for a moment the world of 1962. Television is a relatively new phenomenon. And
Yeah, I mean, since like the 40s, but really the 50s, it starts to kick off with like huge major events, and then it becomes mainstream with commercials. It made mainstream with television shows. We know this. The 50s really kicks it off. So most people have a family television in 1962.
there's not even landline telephones in many homes in the Western world. Outside of the West, the vast majority of the world's population still doesn't even have electricity. Nonetheless, President Kennedy is the first president to make extensive use of TV to communicate. Still, a great many of his viewers will catch him on TV in neighbors' homes or standing in front of a television shop window. His television address will be the first time that an international crisis and the threat of world war is delivered directly to the people via TV.
That's what a interesting time, because the world becomes a little less big immediately because of that. Becomes a little bit, I don't know. It comes full circle.
Over the next 24 hours, it will be replayed again and again on TV and radio all over the world. It will have a stunning effect on the world population, many of whom are veterans or civilian victims of the worst human conflict to date, World War II. Moreover, the Cold War is on everybody's minds. Even those of us like Sparty and me who experienced only the end parts of the Cold War can assure you that we lived in constant fear of nuclear war.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. Our policy has been one of patience and restraint, as befits a peaceful and powerful nation which leads a worldwide alliance. We have been determined not to be diverted from our central concerns by mere irritants and fanatics. But now further action is required, and it is underway, and these actions may only be the beginning. We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved. Thank you and good night.
Wow, so much to be left. So much was left unsaid there in terms of what does that mean? What are we actually doing? Of course, you don't want to give away the strategy necessarily, I guess. And also like what else does that entail in terms of like timeline and so forth. But very well said, very well spoken. Kenny's always had good he's always had a good way with words. Partially why he was elected. Very charismatic. So interesting stuff there. Very interesting stuff. Ooh, chilling though if you are in a happy time in your life and then this comes on and you're like, what's that mean? Wow. The end scene. Oh, on all things.
I'll see you tomorrow on...
Oh, man. All right. Well, leave me some context, guys. I appreciate you as always. Cuban Missile Crisis is getting closer and closer to a crisis. Peace out, and bye-bye.